Well, thank you, Laurentina. Can you hear me?
All good.
All good. Okay, very good. Thank you, Laurentina, for that lovely introduction. I was honored to be a keynote speaker at the uh, conference in Lisbon last year, and I'm extremely pleased to be invited back to the one next Friday, 2 June, in Lisbon, where we will go into these topics in much more detail. And Martha Smith Blackmore will join me there as well. Martha and I both serve with the National Link Coalition here in the United States. And the link refers to the areas where animal cruelty intersects with domestic violence, child abuse, and elder abuse, with the goal of establishing teamwork to get agencies that are in these various fields working together to solve these overarching problems. No one agency, no one department has the resources to solve what is really a combined issue. And by working together, we can do a much better job of protecting animals and people. And veterinarians play a major role in this. And I'll explain the similarities between veterinary medicine and human medicine as I go along here. There is our resource information there, our email address, our website. We have a lot of information on the website at nationallinkcoalition.org. And we have a free monthly newsletter. We have a number of readers in Portugal already. Today, what I'm going to talk about is recognizing and reporting suspected animal cruelty and abuse, and try to put it into a Portuguese context for you, with the goal of the legislation that Laurentina mentioned, to establish reporting procedures there. I am not a veterinarian. Martha is. She will be able to go into more detail and more technical information than I can. And she will give you specific examples. In her case, the state of Massachusetts, which enacted some very significant legislation, and she'll explain the process by which that happened. What I hope you come away with today is an understanding of the role of veterinarians in addressing animal abuse and its related forms of family violence, why reporting it is so important. I'll give you some information how you and your staffs can recognize, record this information, and report it to the appropriate authorities, and to plan ahead and have a protocol in place for when a case of suspected animal cruelty comes across the desk or through the door. And I want to emphasize this word suspected. Not everything that you see is cruel. It's just a case of whether you think it might be suspicious behavior, in which case you make the report. And I'll go into this in more detail. But you need to have a protocol in place to be able to follow through with this. Just a brief introduction to our National Link Coalition. We were formed in 2008, and today we have 5,100 people all across the United States and in 55 countries who receive our free monthly newsletter. We are an NGO working with domestic violence, child abuse, human health, medical, veterinary medicine, law enforcement, prosecutors, and many other professions to work together on this collaborative effort. We did an excellent webinar on Monday for law enforcement officers. We'll have another one on Wednesday for judges and prosecutors. They all have a major role to play in this, and veterinarians and their staffs are right in the center of all this. We work in 4 major areas. We look at programs that are addressing the link. We look at legislation affecting this. We have training programs such as this to build awareness among these different professional groups. And we review academic research, and we have over 2,100 citations in our bibliography now, justifying and legitimizing all this work. We also help establish local and national link coalitions. We have similar coalitions in Canada, the UK, Spain, Italy, and Sweden. We hope to see one emerge in Portugal as a result of this program. What is the link? Well, the link connects the dots. The four forms of family violence: child abuse and neglect, elder abuse, domestic violence, and animal cruelty, have always been treated separately because each field is enormous and everybody is so busy with their own field. They're actually in silos, and they rarely have thought to cross borders and exchange information with each other. And in fact, it wasn't until the early 1990s that the child protection and the domestic violence field began to work together, and the domestic violence field and the elder abuse field began to work together. But the animal cruelty area was always excluded because legislators and prosecutors and the general public always think, well, it's only an animal and it's not as important as human needs. And so people did not realize that animal cruelty is in fact one component of this, and that we need to get out of our silos and work together. We've gotten rid of that model, and this is the model that we use right now. It's a simple diagram that shows that these four forms of family violence all overlap. And anybody working in any one of those areas can easily encounter other forms of family violence. They don't need to be an expert in those other forms. They should have enough basic knowledge to recognize that something is wrong and make a report to the appropriate agency. And as I said, the veterinarian, the veterinary technicians, the veterinary nurses, the veterinary staff officers may very well be right in the center of all that and could very easily see all four forms of family violence walk through the door or into the hospital in the course of their work. Our motto for this is very simple. When animals are abused, people are at risk. And when people are abused, animals are at risk. It's really just as simple as that. And by working together, we're protecting both animals and people. And that's part of the veterinary mandate for not only animal health, but public health and human health and environmental health as well. We've identified a number of different types of links. The most common form is in domestic violence, where the abuser, who's usually a man, but not always, we have women who abuse men, and we have intimate partner violence with same-sex relationships. But for the sake of simplicity, I'll assume it's a man abusing a woman. The abuser will target a soft target. He'll take out the most convenient weakness that he can find in the victim's life. And very often that is an animal in the household, because the animals are usually cared for by the women in the home. The children have, and the women have extremely strong emotional ties with that animal. And this becomes a point of vulnerability. And by threatening or harming or killing that animal, the abuser is telling them that they could be next, and that if they leave, he's going to kill the animal. It's a form of emotional extortion. And as a result, thousands and thousands of women and their children are held hostage. They stay in these abusive relationships for many reasons, but one significant reason is fear of what will happen to their animals if they dare to leave. And the abusers use this as a weapon to intimidate and control them, and to retaliate against them and any family or friends who help them escape. We see a similar phenomenon with child sexual abuse, where the abuser warns the little boy or girl that if they talk, he'll kill her kitten. And so the child is now subjected to multiple levels of anxiety and fear and physical trauma and emotional trauma, and now also has to worry about caring for her pet or his pet as well. We have the impact on children who kill animals or who witness animal cruelty. And we have found that witnessing animal abuse can be just as emotionally devastating for a child as the actual act of hurting an animal. And this can have lifelong consequences of desensitizing a child about violence. We have animal hoarding, which is an extremely difficult problem to resolve. The recidivism rate is 100%. I'll talk a little bit more about this here shortly, but it's a very dangerous issue that affects a lot of aspects of society. And of course, veterinarians are key players in responding to animal hoarding situations. We have dog fighting and cockfighting, which are linked with homicides, with sex trafficking, with narcotics offenses, with weapons offenses, and of course, the danger to the animals themselves. And then animal sexual abuse. There are people who prefer to have sex with animals. It is traumatic to the animals. It is now illegal in 49 of our 50 states, and that has been a major improvement in our laws. And a lot of that is as a result of link evidence showing that people who have sex with animals or who watch animal pornography very often are involved with child sexual abuse and child pornography as well. The link connects the dots and it creates a more effective partnership to help animals and people. We need to get out of silos. We live in a very fragmented society these days. And we see this very dramatically. This is a map of the US. I suspect Portugal would be the same way. People in the human services area say, it's not in my mandate to look after animals. And people in animal shelters say, I help animals, I don't help people. And people in law enforcement say, I deal with people problems, not animals. And consequently, not much gets done. By recognizing that these problems cross all these areas, and by pooling our resources, we can do a much more effective job. The veterinary profession is beginning to recognize this. The two main national veterinary associations in the US, the American Veterinary Medical Association and the American Animal Hospital Association, but also the Canadian Veterinary Association, the Royal College in the UK, and veterinary councils in New Zealand and the Netherlands, all have policies now and standards of practice and professional codes that either encourage or require veterinarians to report suspected abuse, whether or not it's mandated by law, as a way to protect the health and welfare of not only animals, but also of people. And this is not just a companion animal issue. It also affects large animal practitioners because livestock and horses may also be involved with these situations. The public is also beginning to demand veterinarians becoming involved with this. A study in the Canadian province of Manitoba found that when they asked people who would they report animal cruelty to, they might report to the police, they might report to the local animal welfare agency, the Humane Society, but the majority of people would report to their veterinarian. And this can be extremely important in a rural area where the veterinarian may be the only visible sign of somebody who cares about animals. Why is this important for veterinarians? Well, for several reasons. Not only does it protect the animals, it prevents public health issues. It not only protects the patient in front of you, but it protects other animals in the home that could also be at risk and other animals in the community. It's a one welfare issue or a one health issue, which bridges human health, animal health, and environmental health. And the bottom line is that it improves the well-being of animals, which is why veterinarians, of course, are in the field that they are in. I've had two questions that have been rolling around in my mind for the 40 years I've been working in this field. Physicians automatically report suspected child abuse. Shouldn't veterinarians be as proactive in responding to animal abuse as physicians are in responding to child abuse? And in fact, the human medical community went through these same issues back in the 1960s when they became required to report suspected child abuse, and they have resolved all those issues without any major complications. The second question is, where is the veterinarian's primary responsibility? Is it to the client who's paying the bills, or is it to the patient who could be suffering? The best way to resolve these two very difficult questions is to require veterinarians by law to report suspected animal cruelty. Mandating this reporting helps resolve the many ethical and practice management dilemmas that the veterinarian faces with these issues. And it puts veterinarians in a position as being the other family doctor, because that is in fact what veterinarians are. The United States is responding to this very aggressively, and it's exciting to see these changes happen. We are a federation of 50 independent states, if you will. There are very few national laws that address animal welfare. So most laws are done on the state level, and each state has its own set of laws and their own procedures. But since we began raising awareness of the link between animal abuse and human violence, we now have 41 of our 50 states in which veterinarians are either required to report suspected animal abuse or are permitted to report. And in 34 of those states, they have immunity from civil or criminal liability for making a report in good faith to the appropriate agency. And Martha will tell you about the experience in Massachusetts and what they went through in getting their law passed. But this is the current map in the US. There are several reasons why veterinarians should report, and I know Martha will talk about this as well. Veterinarians are really animals' first line of defense. And by reporting suspected abuse, it's a One Health strategy that protects animal welfare. Veterinarians often think that they have to know that it is a case of abuse, because veterinary training is to see a situation, know exactly what the diagnosis is, and come up with a treatment plan. Animal cruelty doesn't work quite so black and white. You don't have to know that it is a case of mistreatment, because there could be a lot of other factors involved. The legal departments, the prosecutors, the law enforcement agencies, they will determine whether or not it's worth charging as a crime. All the veterinarian needs is a reasonable suspicion that it's a neglect, and make a report and document it accurately. And if the veterinarian isn't quite sure as to what this situation is, you can get a second opinion from other veterinarians to help better define what it is that you're seeing on the table. Veterinarians often say they will not see cases of animal abuse or neglect, but they will. They may not see them often, but when they do see them, they will have you scratching your head trying to figure out what to do with this case. And as I said, the situations are often so vague, it runs counter to the training that you've received. And so these issues, these cases are always very problematic. Veterinarians have told me over many years a lot of reasons why they don't want to report. And they include things like they might get sued, they haven't received adequate training, they're afraid that nothing will happen, they don't want to lose a client. They think that if they report and get a reputation for reporting animal cruelty, fewer people will bring their pets to the veterinarian. They have a busy practice. They say they don't have time. They don't know that it's cruelty. And it's obviously a financial issue, particularly for the independent practitioner. On the other hand, why did you go into veterinary medicine? It's because you wanted to help animals. And we believe that desire to help animals outweighs those other concerns. But we have some responses to those concerns. They are valid concerns, but we have some answers to them. And the fact is, as I mentioned, the human medical field crossed these same thresholds 60 years ago. The American Academy of Pediatrics said letting the public know that the physician is mandated to report suspected child abuse will reduce parents' resentment against the doctor. Let's look at some of these concerns and answer them for you. I don't know what the legal situation or the liability situation is in Portugal, but in the US, we are in a litigious society where people will sue anybody else for a variety of reasons. But as I said, 34 of our states now grant veterinarians immunity from making a report of suspected cruelty. And there's little evidence that physicians have been sued for reporting child abuse or elder abuse as well. Many veterinarians say they haven't had training in this. Well, we're starting to change that with veterinary forensics training, and people like Martha and others, are a whole network of veterinary forensic specialists around the world are now introducing this training into veterinary curricula to help veterinarians and veterinary students learn to distinguish accidental injury from non-accidental injury. Veterinarians often say, if I make a report, nothing's going to happen. And unfortunately, in many cases, that's true. In many communities, neither the prosecutors, nor the judges, nor the police really care about this. But veterinarians can take the lead in advancing this cause because people have great trust and respect for their veterinarians. And the fact is that if you don't report a suspected case, all that does is enable the abuser to continue the bad actions. It puts other animals and people at risk, and it compounds the problem. Veterinarians are afraid of losing a client if they report a suspected case of abuse. But as I said, there's little evidence that physicians have had that issue. And I would just say, is an animal abuser the type of client you really want? There's no evidence that mandated reporting has reduced the number of people taking their pets to veterinarians. Many veterinarians just don't want to get involved with people's lives, and I can appreciate that. But it is the veterinarian's job to care for the welfare of the patients and the other animals in the household. Veterinarians have very busy schedules. I recognize that. And they may say that they don't have time to go through what could be a lengthy procedure in a suspected animal cruelty case. But intervening early will save time later. The veterinarian may be called into court to testify, which of course takes time, but courts will usually work around the veterinarian's schedule and accommodate the veterinarian's busy schedule there. Again, how does the veterinarian know it's abuse? They don't have to. The prosecutor will determine whether it's enough evidence to bring charges. The veterinarian's duty is to give them objective findings to help make a decision in that situation. Some veterinarians have told me that reporting the abuse might make the situation worse, and that is a possibility. But not reporting the abuse will definitely make the problem worse and will endanger other animals and other people. Veterinarians are afraid of their staff being endangered by abusive people. And we saw this happen in a case in Florida 2 years ago now. A woman was being held at gunpoint by her abusive boyfriend, but was able to convince him that the dog needed to go to the veterinarian. And so he took her and the dog at gunpoint to the veterinarian. She was able to smuggle a note to the staff saying that she was being threatened. They called the police. They separated the woman and the boyfriend, and the boyfriend was arrested. Human hospitals have all sorts of procedures in place to alert staff to when there's a potentially dangerous situation. Veterinary hospitals can use those same procedures. Veterinarians often are faced with the problem of what happens if somebody on the staff wants to report but the owner of the practice does not want to. And this is why it's important to have a protocol in place so that junior members of the team can report to a senior member of the team or the practice owner and make a decision as to whether to report. There's the issue of confidentiality of patient and client records. I'm not familiar with what Portugal's situation is with that. But here in the US, state laws allow these reports to be made without violating confidentiality procedures. And if these reports are made in good faith to a law enforcement officer to prevent a crime, there's no problem with violating confidentiality. Veterinarians often say that somebody who cares about pets won't hurt them, and anybody who abuses them won't bring them to the vet. That's not true. Abusers will bring their animals in, and if they don't, other family members might. And just because somebody seeks care for their animal doesn't mean they didn't abuse the animal. Many veterinarians say, I'm better working with animals than I am with people. And so they don't want to deal with these contentious issues. We have guidelines, particularly from the New Zealand Veterinary Association, about how to deal with clients in these difficult situations. We have these on our National Link Coalition website. And we're also seeing a proliferation of a new field. It's called veterinary social work. We are training social workers to work in veterinary hospitals to deal with the people in these situations. And finally, many veterinarians say they're afraid to report. And I can appreciate that. But frankly, it's the right thing to do. A couple of reality checks here. Most cases that come to the attention of authorities are really animal neglect, as opposed to physical cruelty or animal sexual abuse. And most of these issues result from the people just not knowing any better, as opposed to psychopaths. Enforcement of animal cruelty laws in the US, and I suspect in Portugal as well, can be haphazard or inconsistent. And it depends on whether there is an animal welfare agency in the area, how prosecutors and judges feel about it, and what public opinion is. And this patchwork nature, this inconsistent nature of investigation makes it extremely difficult for the public to understand what to do and for professionals like veterinarians to respond. Standards of animal care and welfare differ widely. And what the next door neighbor says he saw, what the animal's owner says he did, what the veterinarian finds, what an investigator from the police finds, what the prosecutor decides to do with it, and what a court might decide can be 6 completely different standards. There is no uniform definition in the US because we have 50 state definitions. And it's often up to the courts to make a determination as to whether a case is, cruelty or not. When we're talking about animal cruelty, there are a lot of very contentious issues that society has not agreed on. And animal rights activists take great effort to stop many of these activities, things like what we call factory farming or mass animal production. They want to make everybody a veterinarian, or stop medical experimentation on animals, or ban fur coats. Those are social issues that are important, but we have not achieved consensus as a society about those issues. And they're not really relevant to the link. The link focuses on individual acts of animal cruelty, abuse, and neglect. And that's where we focus because that's something we can all agree on. There are several different types of animal cruelty, abuse, and neglect. The FBI in the United States, our Federal Bureau of Investigation, created a list of 4 types 6 years ago now, when they finally started collecting national data on the incidence of animal cruelty. And here are, the basic types of animal cruelty. The most common form is simple neglect. And it's a failure to provide food, water, or shelter, grooming, veterinary care, and sanitation, the animals that are starved, dehydrated, they have low body weight, low body condition score, open wounds that haven't been treated. Martha will go into much more detail and clinical information on these. This is just a general overview of the types of animal abuse. There can be environmental issues with neglect, particularly with livestock. If the quality or composition or availability of their food is insufficient, or animals that have been abandoned. A subcategory of neglect is serious neglect. This is the animal hoarding situation, where people keep extreme numbers of animals in overcrowded situations. They try to save the animals' lives when the prognosis for the animal's life is poor. They will often go from veterinarian to veterinarian to veterinarian. We call it veterinary shopping because they don't want to arouse suspicions. They're constantly rescuing more animals. And when we find an animal hoarding situation, very often we find dead animals on the property as well, or in the freezer, because these people are so emotionally attached to the animals, they can't even bear to part with them when the animals die. Hoarders are living in a world that is a self-fulfilling cycle of separation. They don't like people, they're socially isolated. And so they surround themselves with more animals because they are friendlier to the animals. They have the human animal bond working for them. But because they have so many animals, nobody wants to be with them. And so they're continually isolated and it becomes a vicious cycle. Animals, as we all know, give us this unconditional regard. They give us a sense of reward and acceptance. It's a conflict-free relationship. They improve our sense of self-worth, and hoarders carry that to an extreme. We've identified 4 types of animal hoarders. Some of them are mentally ill, and a wide range of disorders have been linked to animal hoarding. Some of them are what we call the crazy cat lady down the street, and everybody brings their cats to her rather than take them to an animal shelter where they might be euthanized. And so she gets overwhelmed. Some of them have a rescuing mentality and want to save them all, and they think they're the only ones who can save these animals. And some are exploiters. They pose as a rescue group or as an animal welfare agency and solicit donations when in fact they're just hoarders and the animals are kept in terrible conditions. There is no easy solution for animal hoarding. The recidivism rate is 100%, and it needs animal protection agencies, psychologists, social workers, social service agencies, public health agencies, building departments, fire departments, the courts, and of course, veterinarians to work together to try to resolve these difficult cases. Second type of abuse is physical abuse, which we prefer to call non-accidental injury, or NAI. This is a term borrowed from the child protection field to describe physical trauma to children. And that's sharp force trauma, blunt force trauma, kicking, beating, strangling, burning, and so on. I think Martha will probably give us more clinical information about those. Organized animal abuse is dog fighting or cockfighting. And as I said, it is linked very strongly with many other crimes against people. And there are some telltale signs particularly for dog fighting. You'll see pit bulls and related dogs on heavy chains kept separate from each other because they can't come in contact with each other or they would kill each other. A ring where the animals fight, there's often blood on the ground. A treadmill, these are highly conditioned athletes and they go through rigorous training like a human athlete for the animal fights. Lower left here are what we call breaking sticks. These are sticks that are used to pry open the jaws of a dog when it's fighting another dog, when they want to break up the fight. Often you will see stereotypical injuries on a pit bull. The muzzle might be scarred. The ears might be amputated to keep either bitten off by another dog or amputated by the owner to give attacking dogs one less thing to attack. Also, other sorts of equipment. A spring pole is a tire or another piece of equipment hanging down that the dogs can hang from and use to build up the strength in their jaw muscles. The fourth form of animal abuse is animal sexual abuse. As I said, that's often linked with child pornography and what we call crush videos. These are online videos of women stomping little animals to death, and people get sexual gratification from watching those videos. In the United States, there is no such crime as emotional abuse. There is in child abuse. There is in domestic violence. There's emotional abuse and elder abuse, but there is no such crime as emotional abuse for an animal. And it's important to recognize that each of these four types of animal abuse comes from a different motive and a different pathology, different psychopathology from the person motivated to do this. What are the things you might see? The next few slides all come from this marvelous manual that was produced recently by the Veterinary Medical Association in the American state of Ohio. It's the OVMA. There's their website, ohiovma.org. It's much too much text here for me to read. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show the screen there and pause for a minute so you can see them. The slideshow is being recorded, so you can go back and capture it, or you can just download this manual. It's an excellent short guide to what you might see. These are some of the common presentations for suspected animal cruelty: abrasions or bruising, asphyxiation, burns, dog fighting, drowning, drugs, administration of drugs or poisons, a collar embedded in the animal's neck. And as you go across, it shows findings that suggest non-accidental injury, how to document it, and how to test it, what evidence you need, and how to preserve that evidence. Continuing on, different types of eye injuries, foot injuries, gunshot wounds, trauma to the head, internal injuries, knife wounds, repetitive injuries. Many times these animals are abused over and over and over again. And again, the suggestive findings, how to document it, and how to test and preserve the evidence. Often people will bring an injured animal in and say it was hit by a car. And these are some of the ways to look at these types of injuries and distinguish between a motor vehicle accident and a deliberate non-accidental injury. Some other red flags for suspected abuse when dealing with smaller animals, the interaction and history with the client, and what your evaluation and diagnostics show. And again, I'll just let you look at this. You can go back and see it later. Or again, you can get this on the manual. We have the manual on our website as well. Similarly, some suspected signs of dog fighting. And suspected signs of cockfighting. What are some of the main things to consider in recognizing and responding animal abuse? Well, the first thing is to have a protocol in place, and that may involve calling the police. We have samples of, I think, 7 or 8 of these protocols on our website, nationallinkcoalition.org. Feel free to adapt those for your use and, of course, translate them into Portuguese. Consider everybody's safety. Never compromise the safety of your staff or the animals. And again, if you believe there's a risk of harm, call the police. Treat the animal. You know how to do that, but you have to be ready to collect and document the evidence. And there's some pretty elaborate procedures for doing that. but don't compromise the timely treatment of the animal. That's going to take priority, of course. Again, whether this is cruelty or not is a legal determination, not a medical determination, but you need to be prepared to act. Reporting doesn't mean the owner is going to be arrested or even thrown in jail. It just allows other agencies to investigate it further to make sure that other animals and people are not at risk of harm. Your job is to report your suspicions and document them objectively and be prepared to present them in court as an expert witness if necessary. The New Zealand Veterinary Association began publishing much of this information many years ago. They have a great manual about this. Again, that's also on our website. The veterinarian's role is to get the client to understand that you are giving them your professional opinion and doing what is necessary to uphold animal welfare standards. And by showing them a copy of the law, it helps them understand what you have to do and why this is important. And stating that your concern is for the animal's welfare is important, and then asking the client if she or he is also concerned about the animal's welfare. Be clear and respectful in talking to the client. Help them find solutions. Don't be aggressive or push them. Try to diffuse the situation. Try to de-escalate it. Listen to what they're saying. Don't automatically assign blame. Let the client have a support person, a second person present, which will help them, but also provides an additional witness. You might want to have a second person with you in case it goes to court and you have a corroborating witness. Be aware that animal abuse rarely occurs in a vacuum. It almost always indicates some other problem. Could be psychological issues, financial problems, marital problems, child abuse, domestic violence, or elder abuse. So be aware that there could be wider implications, and this animal case you're seeing is just the tip of the iceberg. I started out as a newspaper reporter, and I know that when you ask people questions, they get very defensive. So it's much safer to ask an open-ended statement as opposed to a deliberate question. So instead of saying, how was the animal injured? If you say, tell me how you think the animal was injured, that's safer. It's not as threatening. Or what do you think caused the injury? Question what the person tells you. Veterinarians are accustomed to thinking that the client is always giving them the truth. They may not be. So you need to document inconsistent responses. Or if one party says something, the client says something, and the children say something else. Ask the children and other family members if they have anything to add. You may want to put them in a separate room and interview them separately. Ask if there are any other animals in the home and any other issues affecting them. Be aware of situations that might trigger a bad response in you personally. This may be an extremely emotional case for you, and make sure you can control your own emotions. And again, if you feel threatened by this, be prepared to back off, be prepared to call the police if necessary. This also came from the Ohio manual. Again, 10 steps on how to document a case. Identify the person or persons bringing the animal in, get their full contact information, where the animal lives, find out what their relationship is with the animal, who else might have been around the animal. Accurately describe the animal, and avoid definitively saying how old the animal is. For example, if you say this was a 5-year-old Cocker Spaniel, but in fact, it's a 6-year-old Cocker Spaniel mix, okay, that could invalidate the court case. So say it appears to be a 5-year-old Cocker Spaniel. Record what the owner says, what he or she thinks what happened. Use their own words if you can. and make note of any situations where the stories don't match, where there's an inconsistency, and include the names of everybody with whom you shared information. Describe any unusual behaviors between the animal and its owner, or between the owner and other people. Look for signs of fear, which could indicate there's a domestic violence issue going on. Photograph the injuries. I think Martha may go into a little more detail on this, but taking micro, meso, and macro photos of the wound to put it all into context, and accurate measurements and diagrams of the injuries, and include this all in the records. Describe how you examined the animal and what your diagnostic findings were. And don't just focus on the presenting complaint. Look for any abnormalities and include a detailed assessment of all of your findings. Record any evidence of chronic conditions and repeated injuries. Save any physical evidence that you find, embedded bullets or embedded splinters, or anything that the person used to try to correct the situation. Record what you recommended to the client and anything that the owner declined to do, and get a signature on their treatment plan if you can. And detail any education you provided to the owner and any schedule of return visits that they made or did not come back for. This also came from New Zealand. It's a very interesting flow chart to show what to do with one of these situations. If it's a case of severe neglect or severe cruelty, severe abuse, if possible, advise the person in charge of immediate treatment and action to alleviate the animal's pain and distress, and notify the appropriate authority, whoever that happens to be. In New Zealand, it could be the SPCA, the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. In the US, it can be an SPCA, a local humane society or animal welfare agency, a city or county animal control agency, or the police. If it's a case that a planned intervention can relieve the situation, that it isn't a very severe case, if you don't think you can intervene and relieve it, report to the appropriate authority. If you think you can help the situation without going this extra step, talk to the person, agree on a plan, document it, implement the plan, monitor whether they follow through with it, monitor whether the outcomes are being achieved. If you're satisfied with the outcome, that's great. Just keep monitoring the case. But if you're not satisfied, again, notify the appropriate agency. There are a number of situations where reporting suspected abuse is really warranted. The owner may admit harming the animal, but he came in to get medical treatment anyway. The fact that he came in to, see the veterinarian might help when it comes to sentencing. It might help the judge realize this person, really did not intend to hurt the animal, but it's not a complete legal excuse. You still need to report it. And also, the animal's physical injuries may indicate a much larger situation of abuse going on in the household. The client may just not know how to properly care for an animal. And again, giving them proper education and guidance may be enough if you document it and discuss it and follow up with it. But again, if they don't follow through, a report should be made. We live in a multicultural society, whether it's in Portugal or the United States, and people emigrating from other countries, and even people within our own countries may have different cultural standards for what they believe is appropriate animal care. Regardless of what their cultural background is, the health and safety of the animal is the priority, and a cultural difference is not an excuse for harming an animal. You may see a situation where the animal really needs to be euthanized, but the client refuses to do it, or he just leaves with the animal. the fact that he refuses to euthanize the animal may not necessarily be a situation of cruelty, and there may be reasons why the owner doesn't want to do that. But refusing to provide appropriate pain management and relieve the suffering would be a reason to report. There are a number of specific features that should raise your index of suspicion in a potential cruelty case. And these came from work in the UK 20 years ago now. No one of these by itself is a conclusive proof of animal cruelty, but a combination of them is certainly grounds for suspicion. And you should include these in your differential diagnosis. And of course, the more of these that are in the differential diagnosis should raise your index of suspicion. The first is the client's profile. This could be a client that you've never seen before, and they may be vet shopping, as we say, going to different practitioners to try to avoid suspicion. Or it could be that you've seen this client for years and you know that they have a turbulent history of pet ownership. There's just this constant stream of animals coming and going, and they've never been able to establish a long-term bond with the animals, or just constant behavioral issues. You may be aware of family pressures going on. As I said, it could be financial, substance abuse, family discord. Well, another telltale sign, sometimes somebody will bring all their animals in and ask to have all the animals euthanized. That is a very telltale sign that the person is contemplating suicide. And if there's a suicide prevention hotline, you should make a call. We have that in the US. I hope Portugal has something similar. You may find problems with the client's behavior. The client may be reluctant to give a full history, or the history is inconsistent. The story that they are telling you doesn't match the injuries that you are seeing. Or there may be discrepancies. The client's story changes over time, or different family members tell different stories as to how the injury happened. The client may say that she doesn't feel safe at home, and that could be a warning that there's domestic violence involved. You may be concerned about this client having too many animals or being isolated without any social support systems to help care for the animals. You may see the client and his wife nervous and deferential around each other. The wife may be fearful of the husband. The children may be fearful. You may find the client has no real emotional attachment to the animal. He's indifferent about its welfare. He's just not concerned. Client may be aggressive or argumentative, and there may be an unexplained delay in seeking medical attention. That could be a warning sign, which should be, any of those should be included in the differential diagnosis. The patient's medical history can be significant. You may find a pattern of repeated injuries to the same animal, or a history of injuries or deaths to other animals in the household. Fractures, multiple fractures in the animal at various times in the animal's life is a warning sign. The age of the animal may be an issue. Puppies and older animals and kittens and older cats are more at risk. Some breeds are more at risk. The fighting dogs, the pit bulls, and those similar animals. And we've discovered a unique phenomenon called Munchausen syndrome by proxy. This is a phenomenon where where a woman, for example, will hurt her child and then rush the child to the doctor, and the doctor treats the child, and the woman gets an emotional boost and gets an ego strength from having saved the child's life, even though she put the child in jeopardy. The same thing happens with veterinarians, seeing clients harming animals and then bringing animals in and getting congratulations from the veterinarian for saving the animal's life. And Helen Monroe in the UK found, I believe it was 9% of veterinarians had seen this phenomenon. You should become suspicious if you suspect that there's child abuse, domestic abuse, or elder abuse or animal hoarding going on. So include non-accidental injury in your differential diagnosis. Automatically consider it as a possibility. Be familiar with what the animal cruelty laws are and if there are any reporting laws. I don't believe Portugal has any right now, but if Laurentina can succeed in this process, perhaps that will change. And know where you need to report and the process by which to do that. Train your staff on this procedure, establish a protocol, an internal decision-making process for who can make such a report and how junior members of the team can report to their superiors. Create a profile of the client with a complete history and a record of all the interviews and detailed medical examinations of the animals. And Martha can talk more about what those involve than I can. Of course, you're going to diagnose and treat the animal. One strategy is to keep the animal overnight or for several days, which will give you a chance to evaluate the situation more thoroughly, to possibly get a second opinion from another veterinarian, and to keep the animal separated from a potential abuser. Lots of procedures involved with collecting the evidence and documenting it and preserving it. I don't know how much of this Martha will go into in her presentation. Veterinary pathologists play a major role with this. It's essential to have comprehensive and detailed notes in case it does go to court. And so these cases can be prosecuted very effectively. Include comments that other staff members have said, their procedures to avoid contaminating the evidence, recording the behavior of the animal, photographing and weighing the animal before and after is very important. Have colleagues witness and document this so it's not just you making these findings. Write a statement documenting everything, putting it in writing. This reduces your liability and helps ensure a better process if it goes to court. It has to be highly detailed and very precise. Remain calm and objective through all this. And it may be difficult because this could be an extremely emotional situation. Everything you say and do to the client could possibly be used in a court of law and come up later. There are standardized reporting forms available. The Ohio veterinary manual that I've been referencing has an excellent one that can be used and modified, just translated into Portuguese. And this includes just the basic details of what needs to go into a report. And the report should include your concerns, the clinical findings, your photographic and diagnostic evidence, information as to who the veterinarian is, any witnesses who were involved, all the details about who the report was made to, how it was made. If the case progresses, it may go to court and you may be called upon to testify. In the United States, veterinarians can get paid for their time for testifying in court, and courts will usually work with a veterinarian to accommodate their work schedule. These cases often attract enormous attention from the news media. And what we tell veterinarians, and again, I was a newspaper reporter when I started out, so I know what the news media want. If you get involved with a case like this and a reporter asks you for information, your best response is to say, I cannot make a comment because there's an ongoing investigation. A reporter will understand that. If you just say no comment, reporter gets suspicious, but say, because the investigation is going on, I'm not allowed to say anything, that they will understand. Some other things you can do. Make your practice a safe zone for victims. We want the public to feel safe coming to the veterinarian's office, to see you as the other family doctor. There are a couple of ways to do this. We're working on a campaign right now which is modeled after the human health field, creating what we call hit-free zones. We're seeing this in human hospitals. We'd love to see veterinary hospitals do this as well. These are posters that say this facility is a place where neither people nor animals get hit or hurt. Adults don't hit each other. Grown-ups don't hit kids. Kids don't hit their parents. Kids don't hit kids. Nobody hits animals. And we have these posters on our website. You can translate them into Portuguese, and there are instructions on how to use them. More than pleased to have you adapt those. We've seen veterinarians adopting something from the domestic violence field. It's a little lapel pin. It's a fairly large lapel pin. And I don't know if you can read this or not. It says, "It's okay to talk to me about family violence and abuse." Wouldn't it be great if people in veterinary offices wore these pins so that women coming into the clinic knew that if they have a domestic violence issue, you're a safe place to share this information with. And veterinary offices should be able to display literature from the domestic violence agencies in the area, because overwhelming number of clients coming into veterinary offices are women. Know who the domestic violence shelters are in your area so you can make a referral or let her know who to call. We have many veterinarians in the US who offer low-cost care or even free care for the animal victims of domestic violence. And they work with domestic violence shelters to care for their pets. They also can coordinate foster care. There's a huge barrier for women leaving domestic violence situations where there's nobody to care for their animals. Veterinarians can provide that care or arrange for care with other agencies in the area. There is a practice in domestic violence called safety planning. Very often, a domestic violence victim has only a few minutes to escape, and she has to be prepared to leave at a moment's notice, taking with her just the clothes on her back, a suitcase of clothes, materials for the children, and any important papers. Well, the animals have to be included in that as well. And we have models of safety plans on our website that include including the pets in the safety plans as well. We also encourage domestic violence victims to get all the paperwork about the animal in her name rather than in his name. That includes the veterinary visits, the medications, the prescriptions, any registration material, any pedigree papers, bills for the pet food. The more of that is in her name, the better chance she'll have getting custody of the animals if there is a divorce following the domestic violence issues. As I mentioned earlier, we have a brand new field called veterinary social work. It comes out of the University of Tennessee here in the United States, training social workers to work in veterinary hospitals in 4 main areas, with grief counseling for clients whose animals have died, animal-assisted therapy interventions, compassion fatigue and conflict management for veterinarians and their staff, wellness training, and also addressing the link between animal abuse and human violence. I call these programs the human side of veterinary medicine and the animal side of social work. And there's the website. We have several hundred veterinary social workers now all over the world. And this is a online program. Veterinarians in Portugal could certainly participate, and social workers could participate. Other great resources. This came from an animal welfare group in the state of Minnesota a number of years ago. It is an outstanding manual on how to report animal cruelty. It's, see if I can flip this up here a little bit. I mean, just well illustrated, well documented procedures of how to do it. There are photos in here, what to look for, telltale signs, very heavily illustrated, and it's been adapted for use in 2 other American states, in Oklahoma and Massachusetts. And the people who developed this are very eager to get it used anywhere else. And there's no reason it couldn't be adapted for use in Portugal as well. On the bottom part of the screen here are several other guides. One that I co-wrote with the American Veterinary Medical Association. The 2 in the middle are from New Zealand. The one on the right is from the United Kingdom. We have all of these on our website. And again, they can be very helpful to you to deal with these issues. So in summary, I'm going to close this out here, and then I think we'll take a break, and then we'll turn it over to Martha, or take some time for questions and answers. First, recognize the common presentations of animal cruelty, abuse, and neglect. Recognize any inconsistencies between the client's history and what your examination finds. Look for repetitive injuries, multiple animals that are injured, fractures of different ages in the patient. Be aware of potential domestic abuse, child abuse, or elder abuse. That's always a possibility. Record this information, detailed history, including the client's statements, all your medical recommendations and consents for treatment, the animal's conditions through your clinical findings, radiography, photographs, diagnostics, and diagrams, and preserve and document whatever evidence you collect. And then report your suspicions of abuse, cruelty, or neglect to the designated agency. And if you suspect domestic abuse, child abuse, or elder abuse, make a referral to the appropriate agency in your area. This is a One Health issue, or a One Welfare issue, as it's called in some countries. This is an umbrella showing One Welfare, which includes animal welfare, human well-being, and environmental concerns. And you can see that this includes the animal-human abuse link, which includes child abuse, hoarding, domestic violence, and most importantly, cross-agency collaborations. And I wrote about this in a veterinary journal a number of years ago, and let me just read this. It says, animal maltreatment is one of the most challenging diagnoses in clinical work, requiring time, experience, emotional energy, sensitivity, tact, and not a small measure of courage. These cases are invariably problematic and difficult to resolve. But a proactive response has the potential to save human lives and reduce animal suffering. Veterinarians are ideally placed as sentinels and can be an essential part of public health to break the cycles of violence. By doing so, veterinarians are working within a One Health approach that unites human and veterinary medicine in common concern for the vulnerable, the victimized, and those who are at risk. Jennifer Wolf is another forensic veterinarian in the United States, and I love what she said. She said, animal abuse is the abused canary in the coal mine. The canary in the coal mine of an abusive home may literally be an abused canary. By responding to the injury or death of that canary, we can potentially save many other pets and people. So with that, Laurentina, do we want to take some questions now? Do we want to take a break? Do we want to turn it over to Martha? How do we want to go with this?